Welcome to another edition of Thought Leaders Live, where we talk with thought leaders in business, life, and all points in between. Excited today to be joined by Mike Sweeney, executive leadership coach, as you can see in his little subtitle there, executive team coach for Saber. Mike, thanks so much for taking some time to chat with me today.
My pleasure. Great to be with you, Greg.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the name of the show is Take a Hike.
Mhm.
Unconventional practices to deepen transformation. And really, we're going to get into some how you use unconventional methods like hiking, moving, experiential learning to unlock some deeper insights and some more lasting change for leaders and teams. You just talked to me, you said to me before we came on, blindfolded ATV rides. So this is going to be pretty interesting stuff. I can't wait to dive into it, Mike. Before we get started, though, on the topic, why don't you bring us up to speed a little bit on who you are and a little bit about your own professional journey?
Sure. I think everybody's professional journey looks like it makes a lot of sense in reverse. So I'll walk you through the
Like,
basics. I started as a U.S. Armored Cavalry officer riding around on tanks. I worked at a wine company for about 10 years, leading a couple, doing plant management for a couple small wineries in Napa for a large company. Shifted over, did some work in legal, did some work in the consulting space. And the red threads for me really have been leadership development, building high performing teams, and facilitating change or transformation. About 10 years ago, I put out my shingle as an executive coach. I started doing a little bit of career coaching on Upwork. I really didn't know what it was. So I started working on building coaching skills, trying to figure out, what outside of going to meetings and doing email, which is the corporate dance, uh, can I do that's marketable? And it feels like facilitating transformation, building leaders, and building high performing teams is a sweet spot for me. I really enjoy it. I am a bit of a contradiction, army guy, girl dad, English major in the army. So I try to bring some things that might be unconventional to couple the typical rational neck up work with some of the embodied work, some of the deeper insights that maybe exist in our subconscious, and then have a lot of fun doing it.
you ever see the picture of when they take a picture of your face and you only see half the face and half might be smiling and then the other half looks like it's angry? I mean, I think what you're getting at in just your own career kind of reminds me of that. You've got this kind of foot in these two different realms, and it comes together to kind of give you this unique angle and unique perspective. It's really interesting.
One thing I want to be clear, I am not the villain Two-Face. but I do think that we live in a world of opposites. Do we need to make this decision fast, or do we need to make it careful and thoughtful? Well, maybe there's a way to make a high quality decision that's in between. Do we need our strategy to be focused, or do we need it to be flexible? Well, maybe there's a way to be both.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be, whenever somebody says something like, I care about the environment, the very quick reaction is often, oh, so you don't care about the economy?
Yeah.
And like we find ourselves in these like head-to-head situations, especially in the US, when it's usually more nuanced. And I read this book, and the metaphor that came up was a wrecking ball, right? So we're bashing from one pole to the other, like being
Yeah.
focused and flexible, voting left, voting right. But sometimes we need to approach these paradoxical situations more like a tightrope walker. And that metaphor really resonated for me. How do we maintain the balance and bring out the
Yeah.
best of both? And I think that's been a nice place to play for me.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's pretty easy to get reductive on all this stuff, and it sure makes for better clicks. We're it's just much easier to go with something that's black and white than to try and appreciate the nuance. Sometimes it takes some time, and we all seem pretty stretched for time.
Mm.
But let's get into a little bit about considering that nuance that we're talking about, and the kind of hybrid approach that you seem to, the tightrope walking that you're talking about. How does this tie in then I mean, that seems like definitely a good prescription for a leader. How do you bring in the movements, things like hiking and movement and experiential? And how did you even get to that point?
Well, by accident is the short answer. I was working with this executive client, and she wanted to do coaching, but she said, "Look, I don't have any time. But I know you're a runner, and I'm training for a marathon coming up in Tokyo. Would you be willing to join me on my long runs, and we'll do the executive coaching there?" And I
That's
almost laughed. I'm like, "You're going to pay me to run with you?" Like, amen. So I wrote this contract, and we had a lot of fun with, your pace or mine jokes, and we
uh,
had, do we pay by the mile or pay by the hour? And we found our way into it. And I really just wrote up a contract and gave it to her and said, "You just fill in the money. I definitely want to do this." So
yeah,
we did it. It was great. I definitely found that when moving, it's almost like bodies in motion, mouths in gear. Things start to tumble out a little bit. I found that when emotion shows up, it's more difficult to keep your pace. So I learned a lot in
wow,
that first engagement. So I racked my brain trying to think, where would I find more clients who are local who'd be willing to run? Or was she the only one?
yeah,
So I thought about a few different creative approaches to marketing and sponsored a local 5K. And I got a call and I said, "How'd you hear about me?" He said, "Back of the turkey trot t-shirt." And I just laughed. And he said, but I'm hurt. I can't run, but I can hike. So there's a little place near me, and I put together a 50-minute course so I could take him out. And it had a little bit of an elevation so I could get perspective, a lake view for reflection, and then a couple crossroads for decision points. And so I would kind of keep in mind where we were in the trek and try to use nature to facilitate those moments of like, here we are, which way do we go? And
wow,
and almost like tongue in cheek it. And I kept doing it with local clients. And what I found is um, I'm a divorced guy who dated in adult life, and you don't ask a woman to go on a hike with you the first date. Like, you just don't do that. So I found that there's an element of safety that you have to be mindful of. So I ended up just naturally coaching more men because I would say, "Hey, let's go for a hike in the woods," and I wouldn't have to, as a girl dad, I wouldn't have to feel
yeah,
like I need to be worried. So more often it was like 80-20 men going with me, and I think there's something about men that sometimes when we get into some of the deeper topics, when we say it, we're hearing it for the first time too. We just don't have the same emotional fluency. And I'm painting with like extremely broad gender brushstrokes here, but um, I found that sometimes I would hear things walking side by side with another activity, like a little bit of sweat, toil, and the hike. I remember hearing this one client say once, "I'm just not sure I'll ever be the man my father was." And
wow,
like the record scratched.
yeah,
And I kind of looked over at him and we were surprised that it came out. And then all of a sudden we had this really deep conversation. So I kept thinking about like, well, how can I do more of this? One of my friends was retiring from the military, and he was like a former colonel. And I went out to ski with him. And he was in that period where a lot of jobs like lawyer, doctor, soldier, they're I am jobs. A lot of our identity is tied up in what we do. And I think for men, some it's not surprising to hear that 70% of a man's identity is contained in what he does. So I went out and I went skiing with him, and I could tell he was struggling a little bit with what's next. And I'd ask a question like, well, what's possible now with all this freedom? And then he wouldn't answer. He'd just think on the way up, and then would ski down, and then on chairlift on the way back up, he would answer the question. And it was almost
oh,
like episodic coaching that
yeah,
motion and elevation and gravity could play a role. And at the end
wow,
of the week, he said, "Good God, that was great." And I had a nice moment of, well, you stayed in the army, but this is now what I do.
yeah,
And I had a nice moment of confidence. But next year, he said, "Why don't you come out again? I'll buy your meals, and you can stay at my condo and just work with another one of work with another one of my friends." And then he and I started talking. We said, "Wow, could we do this for a living? Could we do it maybe together? Worst case scenario, we end up skiing or hiking together." So we
yeah,
brought a cohort of folks out to Yosemite, did Clouds Rest and Half Dome in the same day, had a great hike, and kind of proved the concept. Then we went out did a 3-day hike in Arches National, or not Arches. It's in Utah. I'm losing the thread here a little bit, but we did a 3-day hike, really focused on, where are you now? What is the dream, and what is the path? Then we did it with an executive team where we started to bring in things like ATVs and whitewater rafting, and it really started by accident. But I've found that when you get people moving, you get them outdoors away from their phones, you can get to a level deeper than just a Zoom conversation.
Oh, I totally get it. The
Bryce,
funny,
sorry, it was Bryce.
Bryce, right? Um, you bring up two good points I want to just touch on there. I remember when my son was very young, a friend of us gave us a book. I'm not sure if I think the title might have been "Boys Will Be Boys" or something like that, but it was written by a child psychologist and said that when talking with boys, um, whether it was environment, nature, nurture, um, they had problems opening up like that. And they said a great way to get in touch with them is through during an activity to have a heart
Mhm.
to heart. So we would go outside and shoot hoops, and I would ask questions then. So totally along those lines. I mean, I completely get it, and I do when I go for a walk with my wife. Like you said about that, getting away from it all. It's a great time for us to have a lot of heart to hearts, and some of that stuff, I think having you by their side to prompt those questions
Mhm.
and bring those things up just gets the ball rolling. And we've read the Goddards, I think it is, the love prescription, and they have a lot of prompts for like how to get the ball rolling. So that's really interesting. Um, Tell me, when you've had these, is there's this kind of qualitative
Mhm.
experience that people have had. So, uh, you mentioned, the thing the guy said about it and not measuring up to his father. And do you see things happening after the experience? Do
Mhm.
they report back to you that that change has lasted? And how do they build from there?
Yeah. Um, one thing is once I saw this start to work, I'm a pretty big nerd. I dove into the research.
Okay.
My master's in organizational psychology. I teach at the master's level, so I went into the studies, and I found a tremendous amount of information about the impact of nature and the impact of movement. So I try to balance the intuitive stuff that I'm surprised works with, okay, well, what does the research say? What are the conditions that set people up for success? And a lot of my career was in building um, leadership development programs, and especially integrating reinforcement after sessions. So I tend to think about a longitudinal experience. So, for example, the trip we had in Bryce, um, we had an initial call. What's your intention? Then we had a cohort call to meet everybody. Then we had the multiple days, and then I coached for about 3 months afterwards, every couple weeks. And I think that that's important to lock in the experience. It's one thing just to sit there and have a great experience and go back to your regular life, but I try to, if I think about who you are today and who you want to be tomorrow, there needs to be some scaffolding and some reinforcement in the bridge. So just thinking about one particular client, he described his experience before as churning the devil's lava. Like that's how he felt like every day was just churning it. And he walked away and reported back 3 months later, better mental habits, renewed sense of intentionality, like putting his attention with some intention, um, better parent, better partner, better professional, and got promoted. So that's just one example. And I think that it's critical to lock in the learning so people leave with, okay, who are you moving towards? Some sort of path, but then also provide some support on the back end. And that does make a difference. And whenever I can, um, I try to lock in not only what their goal is, but why and how it connects to something that's really important to them, their values or their business. I think a lot of people have extreme clarity over what they don't like and what they don't want, right? Like, I don't want to work for a boss who's a micromanager. I don't want to be stuck in a job that does this. Everybody they're pretty clear on that, but plants don't grow in the direction of shadow. So
Mm.
sometimes part of my work is flipping the script and be like, okay, so let's assume that all that goes away. What's the opposite of that? What's that thing that you do want? What's that thing you want to move toward? Let's paint a really clear picture of that beach that you're moving to. Let's make sure that we can smell the salt air. Let's make sure that we can feel the warmth on our skin. Let's make sure we see that mental picture, and then let's move toward that with intention. And that's one of the biggest shifts is a lot of times we want to spend time talking about what's wrong or what we need to fix, but that's not necessarily what encourages growth. So I do spend a lot of time trying to clarify the picture of the future that somebody wants, but also being mindful that the distance between where you are today and where you want to be, we have to be mindful of how much creative tension to build because it can break and
Yeah.
people can lose interest. They can forget their commitments. But I'm pretty um, structural when it comes to how to build that back end work and make sure it's connected to some big reason. Because if you just have a few things to do, habits to build, if it's not connected to something they really care about, they just won't do it, and they'll get commitment amnesia.
Commitment and amnesia. It's good. Well, you had a lot of good nuggets in there, turning the devil's lava.
That was his
Um,
words. He's like, I
yeah,
felt like I was churning the devil's lava.
yeah,
And I
um,
didn't even know what that meant at first, but it didn't
yeah,
sound good.
yeah. It didn't sound good, right? That's interesting. That where do you want to be? Do you find that it's hard, one, for people to articulate it, and two, do the majority of people even know what that is, and do you have to help them discover it?
Yes. So, yes, it's incredibly hard to articulate and it's scary because what I noticed is you get gas and brake at the same time, like all this excitement to do it. And then who the heck am I to even consider a dream that big? My process for transformation is based on some organizational psychology principles, but I look at it as kind of three things. One is there's an edge. There's bubbles on the surface of a once calm lake that tells you like maybe something's off and I might want to change something. Could be possibilities, could be like an itchiness that something doesn't fit anymore. But there's some sort of precipice that shows up that someone says like, that feels scary, but I don't know if I can keep doing what I'm doing. That's usually the presenting reason somebody calls me, like I'm at an edge and I don't know what to do. Instead of just asking them to blindly step over the edge, which is so scary,
Yeah.
I tend to then work on what is the peak. And within that peak, it's, what's the dream? How can we describe it? And I think the challenge sometimes is we just don't spend that much time on it. Little exercises like um, your 80th birthday party reflection. Think about who's there. Think about what are people saying about you.
Mm.
Think about like what sort of gifts they're giving. We don't delight in that sort of exploration. We're kind of caught in the thick of thin things, as Stephen Covey said. So I do tend to ask some questions about that peak, but I have to do it in ways that sometimes are a little unconventional. So I mentioned the idea of the smell of the salt air. So there is sometimes visualization that comes into play. Visualization can have big influences on our thoughts, emotions, and feelings. It tends to be increase our capacity to explore. So simply asking clients to close their eyes and build a picture using metaphors can be powerful. Often I get resistance right away, like, oh, close my eyes. That sounds soft. It's like, no, but just do it. Like, just trust me. So some guided visualization can be really powerful, especially to maintain that optimism about a future state. I use a lot of artistic expression. So a picture, draw a literal picture of this thing, and then we'll make sense of it. And immediately clients are like, oh my God, draw a picture. This is like the most woo-woo stuff you're ever asking. But
Yeah.
I have gotten some amazing outcomes. Like a woman who drew a picture of a hot fudge sundae of your future career. And then we labeled it. And we came up with some really big things. Art has the ability to connect our subconscious to our conscious, almost creates a bridge between them. That's
Mhm.
another thing that I might do. So I have a lot of exercises that try to encourage people to stay in that positive, like parasympathetic nervous system rest and digest energy for long enough to kind of build the picture. We can get scared of it after,
Yeah.
We can take a step over that edge because that middle space between the edge and the peak is the unknown. That's that
Yeah.
wild journey once you decide to move in that direction. But there has to be a way to stay positive, hopeful, curious enough. Um, and I think number one, it's very hard to articulate. So their support is needed. And then two, there have to be a couple different methods depending on what resonates with the client in order to get them to build that. And I have found that a high percentage of people get scared of the dream.
Oh,
Like
I
once
can.
it's there, it's like there's no way. I still have a piece of paper from a coach I worked with years ago that was called My Life with 8 Clients. It took me like 2 weeks to do this. It's probably a half a page long and it scared the hell out of me. And now I've doubled that, right? Like there are some months where I have double that. I'm like, I can't believe I was worried about that. But that first step, cross the threshold, can be
Mm.
incredibly scary. So almost providing some support, encouraging people to articulate a big, bold dream, knowing that right after that, fear, imposter syndrome, nervousness, a desire to drop the dream will happen. There's a good book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, and he talks about this thing called the upper limit problem. Whenever our internal thermostat for joy, success, love hits a high ceiling, we start to engage in self-sabotaging behaviors and inner critic voices to try to keep that dream down. But I think I'm pretty decent at maintaining a safe space to build that dream, that peak, and then partnering with somebody in the unknown once they decide it's time to step over the edge.
Let's talk about after they've stepped over that edge and getting into the unknown, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about a lot of my marketing clients where we've talked about um, where you want to get to, what do you want to do, and what we want to do with the marketing efforts. And it's easy to kind of sell that. It's
Mm.
tough to keep them believing and wanting to do it. So how do you get into that kind of messy middle, where you're now engaging in pursuit of that dream? What do you do to keep them going and keep them engaged?
Yeah, be careful. So
Okay.
I think uh one thing I can get frustrated with is like I don't enjoy reminding someone or trying to convince them about their dream. Like that's not my job as a coach. But
Mm,
sometimes I can find myself in that, and that can be frustrating. So, what did Viktor Frankl say? Like, he who has a big enough why can handle any how, or something like that. It's something like that. But so making sure that we connect whatever this thing is to why it matters. Usually, there's some values work in there or purpose. Like
yeah.
if somebody wants to make a career shift, let's say, for example, to a nonprofit that supports veterans because that's meaningful to them. If we can connect to that deep why level, that makes it's because that's what I have to do. It's what I'm called to do. So getting deep enough is important. Um, I also feel like recognizing that in that unknown, think about uh, caterpillar, butterfly, chrysalis. In that chrysalis stage, that metamorphosis, there's a full deconstruction and reconstruction happening. That is very uncomfortable. So I think being comfortable that there is going to be feelings of grief, loss, sadness because of the identity you're moving from. There's going to be the imposter syndrome is going to show up. Um, so there are a few tools that I use. One is I often use a concept from the alter ego effect called a hero's rebuttal or a response proclamation, where you think back in your career or your life of all the great things you've done. So when someone says like, who the heck are you to try this? You can quickly flip the script and say, you know who I am? I'm the guy who's done this.
Yeah.
I'm the girl who's done that. I'm the woman who's done this. So step aside, inner critic. Like having that script at the ready is really important. Spending some time in nature, experiencing awe, I think is a big part of this too, because you can feel small, but in a good way, and it helps you connect to something that really matters to you. I've used the Designing Your Life Odyssey mapping. I like to plan micro celebrations. So, like if you imagine that you're hiking up a hill, the peak is very far away, but like that bush was like right next to us an hour ago. So kind
Yeah.
of building in some of those milestones along the way, building in reflections to see what we're learning, checking in to see if the peak is in the right area. And this is where most of the time clients ask for like a tough love accountability partner. Sure, but you don't want a 10 out of 10. You don't want someone who's going to yell at you. You want an 8 out of 10, someone who's going to have some empathy to realize, look, this stuff is hard.
Yeah.
Trying this new thing, doing this identity, posting that thing on LinkedIn, that is scary. And making sure that there's enough empathy and care to realize that phase between, Bridges calls it the difference between a square and a circle is a squircle. When somebody is literally deconstructing their identity and then reconstructing it in a different way, that's extremely hard and sometimes painful.
Yeah.
Just making sure that there's a high level of care and support with the accountability. So deep enough, high level of care, micro celebrations, and then a few tools are the way I approach that. But it's not easy.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes long. Sometimes there's hesitation. Sometimes the peak changes. Um, I actually did a bunch of videos when I was stepping across the threshold, and all sorts of emotions like fear, uncertainty, doubt, imposter syndrome, failure came up a lot. And I think just being sensitive to both helping them progress, but also realizing what they're doing is extremely hard is kind of my long talking to think, long answer to a short question approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I Wow, so many great insights in there. I always feel that I wake up at 3 in the morning every now and then and have all those imposter syndrome and anxiety thoughts and stuff. And I always feel much better when I get up and I get to work.
Mm.
Like for some reason, the being engaged in the work of some sort kind of has a calming effect on me. Like, okay, I'm engaged in it. Do you find that happens with leaders sometimes? It's just like they just enough with the planning, like let's go on the hike, let's move, right?
Yes, I am informed by the work of this British, I think, organizational psychologist named Wilfred Bion. He used to do some group, like, post World War II discussions, and he ended up writing a bunch about group relations. And he has this concept where there are two things happening with a group. Number one is the task that that group is there to accomplish. And then number two is the level of anxiety in that group. And what he found is when the level of anxiety rises to a certain point, the task becomes managing the anxiety. So that's what I mentioned before about like that ability, that tension. I think that works at the individual level too. Like when I have something big to do, let's say I have a keynote. If I am actively rehearsing for that keynote, I'm okay. If I'm putting off rehearsing that keynote, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse and scarier and scarier. So I do think there's an element of like getting to work. If one feels like things are overwhelming, or sometimes just spending an hour clarifying what needs to be done, putting it in order, and realizing like, oh, that's probably an 8-minute task. That's a 5-minute task. But the feelings I have around it are really high. So I try to really focus the clients on what's the task that we're working on, and what's going on around the task, and are you fleeing from task by spinning,
Mm,
scrolling, circling, doing things that are not that important, or are you focused on the task? So I take that concept that comes up in group relations and apply it to the individual. Are we focused on the task, or is our task to manage our anxiety about the task?
wow.
And I think to your point, if we are getting up at 3 a.m. and worried about something and then getting to work, we usually feel better if we're getting some of the work done. But if our task is to manage our own anxiety through all sorts of self sabotaging, self soothing type behaviors, that anxiety is not going anywhere.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, Mike, we're already at the top of the hour. This could go on for a long time. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and some fantastic. I feel like you just spewed out like a reading list worth of stuff here. Like all
I'm a
these,
pretty big nerd, I'll admit it.
oh, that's awesome. That's good, nerd. Um, Fantastic. I think just your perspective and your combination of nature and just really tapping into that side that we all have and as human beings and helping leaders. This is really brilliant stuff. If somebody wants to work with you, Mike, how do they get a hold of you?
Easiest way is either go to LinkedIn, Mike R. Sweeney, or sabercoaching.com, SABER coaching.com. And they can find me there. And if anybody is really interested in doing those blindfolded ATV rides, we'll take your executive team out and have some fun. So they
Can
can definitely let me know.
Do you have an extra minute? Because I
Sure.
threw that out there. Can you just tell us what the heck is involved with
Sure.
that?
So this was some work that my business partner and I did, mixing in some work for an executive team and the outdoors. So it was a multiple day experience. They showed up, built some psychological safety, had some drinks around the fire, house on a hill, private chef. It was wonderful. Next day was focused on um, organizational culture. We spent some time whitewater rafting. What happens when rapids and change shows up. We did a little work identifying their, what is high quality talent in their organization. Next day, we focused on organizational design and we did some canyoneering. So, trusting in a system, designing a system, and not focusing too much on Herculean effort. What happens when fear shows up? We had a 120-foot rappel in there, which was fun. Did some stargazing that night, focused on succession planning and future stars in the organization. And then the last day was focused on building really strong, powerful, high trust duos. I believe that a duo is the smallest atomic unit of a team. I'm borrowing that language somewhere that I read, I think, in Wired to Connect. And so we did some commitment exercises, and then everybody drove with everybody else. But during the time while they were driving, and I mean, it was a blast. I'm driving these ATVs for a living. But we blindfolded one and we focused on communication, listening skills, then also what does it feel like when you delegate and you lose visibility and control. So we had periods of like 5 minutes of blindfold driving, then we would go crazy for like 40 minutes, then we would switch, debrief a little bit, switch partners, and then kind of brought it all home in a final 5-course meal and fireside chat. And I think that team really got a lot of value out of the mix of business content, but also experience in the outdoors, pushing themselves past their boundaries, past their own edges. And that sort of work with executive teams. My business partner is an exceptional outdoor guide. I bring the organizational development side. We come together. We were former lieutenants together. And
Awesome.
back in 1999, we used to ski, talking about someday building this awesome business where we got to take people into the woods and then help grow their leadership and team skills. And here we are, finally doing it.
That's so fantastic. I don't think I was listening carefully enough. Who's blindfolded on the
The
ATV?
driver.
The driver, and then the passenger is giving the directions.
Yep. And so what's interesting about it too is that we were on a single track and these three duos were all kind of moving in separate directions. And I was able to get a picture of like, well, what happens when the team loses visibility and control? But it's basically you have to drive. The only sense you have is your listening capabilities and kind of maybe what you feel, but you don't actually see the task. It is very similar to, small company delegation. And I think sometimes there's a tendency for people who have grown up like either starting the business or adding a partner or adding a few people to keep their hands on the wheel. And
Yeah.
then the team becomes as productive as the individual holding the wheel. So a little bit was like, how do I kind of metaphorically get my hands off the wheel, or at least find a way to keep moving forward when I can't see everything? So the debrief discussion afterwards and asking, what does it feel like to lose visibility and control, allows them to make the connection between handing off a task fully and keeping your hands on the wheel. We can also ask, where are your hands on the wheel in your business? Where do you feel like you're veering off course? And we use almost the outdoor experience as co-facilitator to bring out the things that you might get in a boardroom on whiteboards, but it's way more fun.
I love it. All your background as a English major coming to fruition with all the metaphors that you're able to drop on your clients. So, Mike, again, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Greg. Thanks so much.
And hold on for just a sec. I'm going to end the stream here. And thank you all for joining us on another edition of Thought Leaders Live. We'll catch you on the next one.